Afternoon, everyone. Today, I'd like to welcome y'all to my presentation on Nonaka's theory of organizational knowledge creation. So, in principle, this theory is all about what makes information understood by others and how to best create the system of knowledge exchange between people or groups. So, some of the things I'd like to touch on before we dive in. If you have questions or comments, feel free to share. They'll appear on the screen. Uh, Everything else I already talked about before recording, so you guys get it. Just some quick definitions. I also think this really sets the stage for what the content of this theory is as we get into it. But these are three terms I just really like to think about. They're nearly synonymous in everyday language, but there's a lot of nuance in the distinction between information, which makes up knowledge, which, when critically examined, can turn into understanding. The two different types of knowledge are going to be really important for Nonaka's theory. There's a lot of ways to distinguish these, and strangely, I feel that most of us already have the tacit knowledge of what the difference is, if not the explicit knowledge on how to say it out loud. But that's just it. Tacit knowledge is deeply understood, whereas explicit is easily communicatable to one another. So this is tying back into the graph that we saw towards the beginning, the tacit and explicit knowledge on each of the columns. And let's break it down. Going back to the table, it really is just saying how knowledge moves from one source to another. There's a cycle here, starting from my tacit know-how to yours, where we brainstorm ideas, we talk about what we know to be true, and bring those ideas to the surface. That communication really helps bring it into the external world. And from there, we can start writing them down, maybe coming up with helpful visuals or effective metaphors to get our point across. We can combine what we've made, maybe make a presentation like this one, and then when we share that with other people, they're given the chance to internalize what we've just taught them. And with their new tacit knowledge, the cycle can continue. They'll bring these ideas that they pick up from this chat, or you guys in chat will bring these ideas with you to other parts of life and be able to start that conversation, take it out in the external world, combine it with other ideas that were shared with you. So it's a really cyclical thing, and there's a lot of the screen right now, so I want to clean it up really quick to make sure these core ideas stick with us a little bit better. First, put these words in a more clear place. These are concise descriptions for each element, but we'll need a quicker way to call back to these throughout the presentation. So using Nonaka's terminology, we have socialization, externalization, internalization, and combination. Not in that order. I was just reading how it was on the screen. But I added little letters to make it easy to remember where each of them sits, going from tacit to tacit, from tacit to explicit, explicit to explicit, and then explicit back to tacit knowledge. So that's where everything sits in our metaphysical Punnett square here. I'm also going to change the little arrow because it was really hard to type that after this slide. And now we have something we can work with. This is a knowledge system, and we just covered all of its elements, and we already know its purpose, to help us organize the creation of knowledge in others. Now, talking through this is inherently difficult, but it makes sense. We're actively learning about knowledge transfer that takes multiple steps, and there's no way to just convey it in one. So let's move past the terminology. Putting it simply and trying to find out when this theory is actually used, even the most ingenious solutions to sustainable problems in our world are never going to get implemented right away. People aren't logic machines. We act illogically, don't accept facts as truth, often failing to realize what's obvious to one person isn't to another. Those principles are really what the need for social theories as a whole represent. But what's good about Nonaka's organizational theory is that it's geared towards educating others on how these inherently good ideas that may go against initial biases actually get to someone. How it helps them come to a conclusion on their own, given all the external knowledge that they're provided with. It's also helpful to pair the theory with some relatable actual examples. So, and this is a great part if you guys come up with your own examples on how you can share knowledge or it's been shared to you, definitely throw it in chat. Um, the theory of knowledge organization is best used when you have a piece of something to start with because it is that idea or spark of creativity that you hold on an implicit level. Maybe you come up with an idea to mix milk and flour together, but you're not really sure what you're going to do with that. So you start doing some research and you found out a bunch of other people had this tacit idea of throwing random things in the oven to see what would happen. So you get together and other people have even better ideas, adding eggs, sugar, doing it for a set amount of time. And once you have all these external ideas that you can say out loud, communicate with one another, you start to bring it down and make it more concise. You can turn it into an actual recipe written down from all the research that you do. Incorporate your own flair from your tacit knowledge that you came to the table with. Maybe you had cardamom and brown sugar instead of white sugar. In the end, you can share not only the cake that you made, but also the recipe that you used to make it. And other people can take that tacit knowledge and take their own spin on it. So this process of learning how to do things to then being able to teach them happens all over the place. Another real world example, this one with a bit more sustainable impact, came from my global study trip last April. So I went with a group of 20 students, all of us having unique perspectives and different backgrounds. And we learned from great educators all across the islands of New Zealand. Us asking them questions and them teaching us things in all kinds of different ways. We were able to combine our assumptions with their externalized knowledge. And then at the end of the day, what they were aiming to teach us actually sank in by our own independent reflection once we had all of that combinatory effort put together. So the most impactful part was that this did happen every single day. It's not a one and done process, but one day I learned about the sustainable infrastructure in the aftermath of a destructive earthquake. Another, I learned about the boon of volcanic ash for the regrowth of plant life. And another, I saw the impact of global warming on our planet's glaciers firsthand. It's a cyclical operation which takes all the knowledge we've internalized and lets us bring it with us to create these novel ideas again and again. My final presentation for that class actually took these three ideas here into one on how we grow in the wake of destruction. I also just like sharing my travel photos, but let's get back on track. So where is this knowledge going from? Who is it going to? Broadly speaking, there's two other systems beyond this knowledge system that we were just discussing. The knowledge system being that tacit, explicit table we were just looking at. Project systems are very akin to their name. Projects are, business systems first work very systematically and step by step. So while examples listed on the side are very corporate, a business system can appear anywhere. A traffic light is a business system because it operates on a set timer and is very rigid and has one function that it performs perfectly. Project systems, though, are much more akin to their name, with projects segmenting groups apart from one another, almost siloing them off. This creates a good focus on the task at hand, but can be ruinous for knowledge sharing between these two groups. Two different intersections that aren't in sync can cause a gridlock, even if they're working at an efficient pace on an individual level. So this is where the knowledge system can step in and exchange information with these other systems. Now, our traffic lights respond to one another because of elaborate traffic coding and maybe have those cool weight sensors for late at night that work great unless you're on a motorcycle. And I'm throwing a lot of terminology, but this is going to be the last big one for a little bit here. But Nonaka describes people who contribute to the knowledge system as knowledge activists. I'm grateful to work in a knowledge system in my current role, and can be that knowledge activist for other teams. So let's step back slightly and see how these two ideas fit together. How does one system fit into the whole? We have this basic one showing the cycle of knowledge. I just replaced the to and the from with the different systems. Our knowledge system going up and down, and the project system is where that information is going to. Now, bear with me here, because talking about a two-dimensional system is really tough with words, but you can see firsthand how effective a 2D visual is for taking in this 2D piece of information. Adding a dimension to this is even more difficult to articulate, which is why, after I internalized the idea of multiple project teams can mutually benefit from the socialization with a knowledge activist, I needed to find a way to externalize this idea. So I took this externalized knowledge and combined it with other skill sets to put together this to show how two different knowledge systems can interface with one another, and the knowledge activists can take ideas from multiple teams and share them with one another. In my current role at work, I'm the Envision coordinator. Envision is basically a lead certification for infrastructure projects. And that means I'm the main point of contact for multiple different project teams. The office project team, let's say the green one on the right side, will come to me with questions on how to do things the right way. Once we come up with new ideas that we want to implement, I can go to the field team, the blue one, to share these ideas, who can provide feedback, fueling the cycle to repeat again and again. That was a lot, so ask me about these arrows at the end. Now, this isn't a catch-all solution for making anyone in your life learn anything that you want to make them understand. So I'm just going to touch on these briefly, but the main drawbacks of Nonaka's theory are it's very collaborative in principle. It's not a great thing to go to when you have a conflicting circumstance. There's ways that once you get to a conflict, kind of not standstill, but once you start getting some ground with the other person, this can help develop that relationship afterwards. It's also difficult to define tacit and external knowledge, and getting bogged down in that detail can be really slowing for the ultimate progress of the spread of information. So focusing on that long-term objective can help with this. Working with different working or learning styles of people can be really difficult and may even require miniature loops of this theory of knowledge sharing within the socialization stage to kind of get people on the same page on how you want to externalize the information. And then we'll come back to this one at the end, but it falls apart to excessive rigidity. It's an inherently creative system, and if you're trying to use Nonaka's theory in a very rigid way of come together and write this note, use this metaphor, combine them in this way, then it really gets stuck at just that first or second stage. But again, there's a great quote from Kant we'll see towards the latter part. I had this idea on how I could work with anyone who wanted to tune in to come up with their own knowledge creation example. And in putting together the example, we would go through each of the steps, but I am already running over on time. So if y'all want, we can come back to this at the end. But jumping into the synthesis section, this is tying Nonaka's theory into a few other ones that I've learned this past semester, including John Warden's 5-ring model for air power strategy and what makes it an effective teaching tool, the concept of days-in from being in time, with the aim of incorporating how our very existence lends itself to constantly learning, and finally how the abstract concepts of knowledge and its transference relate to Kant's categorical imperative, how our duty to help others act in similar ways by teaching them what they may not know. Those last two got pretty out there and metaphysical, so we're going to start with John Warden's 5 rings and why this is such a good model. Give me a second. So John Warden's Five Rings essentially is a way to visualize your opponent in a military situation or any sort of conflict situation and identify the strategic heart of their operation. And what it says is that it's most beneficial to target the leadership of your strategic adversary because it has the best chance of resolution for the lowest input of effort. Now, what makes this model so effective is that it's very visual, it's very concise. You can see five rings and immediately know, oh, if I go towards the center, I get more impactful with what I'm aiming to do. And it uses very understood terms, population, infrastructure, leadership. So John Warden uses Nonaka's theory of taking his tacit knowledge on how militaristic air power works, brings it out into a way that is much more easily communicatable to other people, and then in doing so, allows that information from his externalization that we see in our own external world to take in and bring that knowledge with us elsewhere and see how else we can apply it in life or in sustainability in the case of this class. Moving to the second example, Dazen is a much more difficult to theoretically conceive of concept than John Warden's Five Rings model, but it's essentially our own recognition of being. Being in Time, the book by Heidegger, is all about beings within time and how that existence is kind of shaped. So, one of the most important points, and this is a quote from one of the reviews on Heidegger's work, Dasein, that essence of being, is not theoretical but practical. Theoretical guidelines are not effective, and knowledge isn't retained until it's practical, ties straight into Nonaka's theory because it takes those outermost portions, the externalization, and says that they need to be in the real world. They need to be things that we can interact with. We can't just go from tacit knowledge to tacit knowledge because there's only a theoretical link between the two of them. To drive this point home, there's a very nuanced metaphor that Heidegger uses. It's called Heidegger's hammer. And what the hammer is changes based on how it is being used. When a carpenter has a hammer on their tool belt, then it is just a hammer. But when it is being used, it takes on metaphysical properties of what its abilities are made up of. When you are driving a nail into a piece of wood, then you are not just using wood and metal to do so. You are using the skills of being able to swing a hammer, the knowledge of which end of the hammer you should be swinging, and the motion of your arm with the tool in your hand to send the nail, another part of that ultimate system, into the wood. There's a lot of pieces of information going on when the hammer is being used, and it relates to Nonaka's theory of knowledge transfer and knowledge organization because there's so many different tacit pieces of information that make up everything that we know, that to be able to put them all together into one known idea, the knowledge on how to drive a hammer is tacit knowledge. You can explain or you can read an instruction manual on swinging a hammer, but until you actually take that practice and see how it's done, understanding all of those components on a level that's impossible to articulate, then the knowledge itself doesn't sink in. Another great example on Heidegger's hammer, because it's a difficult concept, just to help anyone who's curious. I kind of saw it as checking out a library book from a library. They still have or own the book, but where is it gone? It's no longer a book in the library. It is now a tool being used for its true purpose, educating people. And while it isn't in the library, it is fulfilling its purpose more than it ever could have on the shelf. So all of this is driving into the point that we must become immersed within the organizational methodology, getting down into the system itself, because from the outside, it's just a hammer. Once we get on the inside, then we can really learn how that information transfer is occurring. This is the really good quote that I think helps understand that difficult idea. So, as put by Kant in one of his letters to a peer, he states that those who are most thorough in note taking are seldom capable of distinguishing the important from the unimportant. Essentially, by copying down verbatim what Kant said in his lectures, he believed that knowledge was not transferred, but merely taken from one externality of speech to another of written word. Now, Kant never used the terms tacit and explicit knowledge, but the idea definitely would resonate with him. So, in his signature work, The Critique of Pure Reason, or at least the first of his works that was widely published, he aims to find integrity by using a universal law, something unequivocal that could guide truth and integrity for everyone, a structured path to understand the world. So, on the very first page of Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, he breaks down his interpretation of knowledge into two very familiar categories. A priori, knowledge from within, is very similar to the tacit knowledge, knowledge from which we have internalized from our cognition, and a posteriori, knowledge sourced from the outside world, is comparable to our explicit knowledge, knowledge which can be said or observed in that acting world. Now, to get from the external knowledge to the tacit knowledge, Kant, using his own vocabulary, he claims that we can get there, and this is really what understanding pure reason is, the understanding of pure reason being that ability to take in external knowledge and chastise it? Kant claims that we can get there with these three unintelligible pieces of language. So, translating just a little bit, we can take in the external reality, we can categorize what we see around us using our judgment. If we're walking through a forest and we see a tree and a bunch of grass, we can categorize the trees into trees and the grasses into grass. And then we can find unity within those ideas. Once we have a deep, innate understanding of trees and of grass, we can recognize their differences, but even still know that they are more similar than the dirt or the rocks, that may be closer in scale, but different in their unity within the world. These tie straight into Nonaka's steps of the theory of organizational knowledge transfer. Taking in our external reality and externalizing our thoughts, both are that interfacing with the outside world, categorizing using judgment, and the combination of ideas into groups are both sitting in that external world and piecing things together into something that we are now prepared to take in and take with us. And then finding the unity in those ideas is the very act of internalizing them into the mind. Coming from this principle of the universality of knowledge, it's now clear how we end up in these two categories, the imperative maxims and Nonaka's theory, from the universality principle. Kant's maxims are merely the pieces that he uses to help guide his categorical imperative. Not the point of the presentation, but that's how he derives meaning from the universal principle. That's what he's taking as the next step. Nonaka, taking from this universal principle, derives reason for a methodology to further understand our world. Here's all my references. My face is covering up some of them. references for the synthesis section, and then for all the presentation images throughout. So I'm going to kill the recording and stay on for a little bit if people have questions.